Hi, I'm Chris Kepler, and welcome to Does This Happen to You? I'm an actor, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and writer. I love reading, pondering, and sharing humorous stories about the freakish things that happen in everyday life. That's why this podcast features funny stories from fantastic writers about our daily aberrations, a micro audiobook about life and befuddlement just for you. Our story this week is from Michelle Teheu, who you'll find on Medium.com. And here is, I should never have brought Seymore to life, because now he has power over me. How my sourdough starter rules my life. When you marry, have children, or adopt pets, you expect to have new demands made on your time. But there's another living entity that will not leave you alone: sourdough. Like Dr. Frankenstein, I brought something to life and have faced circumstances I could not have foreseen. Tip for you non-English majors: Frankenstein was actually the doctor. The monster himself is not named. However, my attention monster does have a name. He's Seymore, and he's a pain in the ass. Seymore is 9 years old. Perhaps that's a tough age for sourdoughs, and that's why he's so difficult. I don't know. Back in 2015, I was laid off from my job as the editor of a daily newspaper, and I was sad and had unaccustomed extra time on my hands. So one of the things I did try to feel happier was make a sourdough starter. It's something I'd always wanted to do, and there was no better time. I got my instructions from the King Arthur website, and they worked well. My European husband doesn't much care for American-style bread, so he welcomed the loaves of bread I started turning out. I already knew how to bake bread, but if you use yeast, you can make it sporadically. That yeast will sit on a shelf and wait for a long, long time. But if you have a starter in the house, you are committed to making bread, or some kind of sourdough product, every few days. Or you have to throw away some starter, and I hate to do that. It kills me to waste food. Seymore is relentless. He's down in my kitchen right now, but he's also in my head. I know he's all bubbly and begging to be made into bread. If I miss this window, he's going to deflate. Deflated sourdough starters appear very sad. You have to feed them. They can't make good bread when they're sad and deflated. I saw how ready he was this morning. My kitchen is chilly, which Seymore doesn't particularly like, but he was quite the cheerful, bubbly little fellow this morning after rising all night. I knew he wanted me to make bread, and I wanted to make bread too, but I've got to make a living. My stories don't write themselves. Use AI like everybody else. Come on, give me some flour and water and salt and a good knead. I need it, he seemed to say. He may be too sad to bake bread when I return downstairs. If so, I'll have to figure out something else. Sourdough crumpets? Popovers? Pancakes? All these are good, and my husband will happily snarf down pretty much any bready thing I make for him. Sourdough crumpets rock. I started making them during the pandemic. At first, I made little rings out of foil, and then I sprang for real crumpet rings. Sourdough popovers are also incredible. And yes, after making them with muffin tins a few times, I went ahead and bought a proper popover pan. I talk a good simplicity game, but when it comes to sourdough, I am a hypocrite. I have to work hard to resist buying baking stuff. I badly want to buy a grain grinder. I've wanted one for decades. I need one in order to start my own daysum. I first learned about this in the Laurel's Kitchen Bread book, which I bought around 30 years ago. It requires freshly ground flour to make the daysum, which the book describes as being like a more sophisticated sourdough. I have always wanted to try my hand at making Flemish daysum bread. I could never have guessed, back when I first got my grubby hands on the most hippie handbook of baking ever, that I'd someday be married to a Flemish man. But here we are. Yes, he's Dutch, but they've traced the Tehu family origins to De, Belgium. When I asked him if he knew what daysum bread was, he did. Of course, I pronounce it wrong, as I pronounce our last name wrong, even after 17 years of marriage. We looked at grain grinders once again. The good ones remain too expensive to seriously consider buying, so I've still never made a daysum. Thus, Seymore is all I've got. Seymore had many children during the pandemic. I was already in the forefront of two big trends that the pandemic accelerated. I had already begun growing out my hair and was rocking quite a bit of silver by the time everybody else had around an inch of gray showing. And secondly, I had sourdough. I put out the word on local social media that I had starter to share, and I gave out quite a few starts to others. I doubt many of those bakers have kept their sourdough going. It's almost like keeping a sourdough starter going is a pain in the ass. I can feel Seymore calling me. As soon as I finish writing this, I'll go downstairs and tend to him. Hopefully he's still bubbly, and I'll mix 5 cups of flour, not quite 2 cups of water, a cup of Seymore, and a scant tablespoon of salt. I'll knead the dough, put it in a bowl, and let it rise for a bit before popping it into the fridge for a good long cold fermentation. Tomorrow or the next day, I'll let the dough come to room temperature, and will shape it into a tight ball and place it on a sheet of parchment. I'll cover it with a large bowl and let it rise. Then I'll drop the whole thing, paper and all, into a preheated 500-degree cast iron Dutch oven. I'll turn the oven down to 450 degrees and bake it for 45 minutes. Then I'll remove the lid and let it bake for another 7 or 8 minutes. I'll also give Seymore a good meal of 2 parts flour and 1 part water, and he'll be happy for another couple of days. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, let me know and share it with your friends. Follow me at Chris Narrates on Twitter or Chris K. Kepler on Facebook, or check out my website, chriskepler.com.